Hi, everybody. I hope you're having a good night. I'm certainly having a very good one myself. Since I just went over Bernie's housing plan, and now I'm going to go over it with you. So please share, like, and subscribe. when you get a chance. Hi. Hi again. So, hi, Devora. Hi, Bonnie. Hi, Dale. Hi, Lana. Hi, Susan. Hi, Margot Shepard. And hi, Dolores Piers. I hope everybody's well tonight and having fun. It's another great plan from Bernie Sanders. I think I'd call this the housing justice plan. What Bernie did, though, is he called it the Housing for All plan. And he said, in the richest country in the history of the world, every American must have a safe, decent, accessible, and affordable home as a fundamental right. So another right in Bernie's economic Bill of Rights. I'm going to share his plan with you now. So you can see it. It may take a minute to appear on your screens, but there it is. So you can see it. It may take a minute to appear on your screens. I guess I've lost it. Here it is. Sorry. Okay, so he starts out by talking about the problem. He starts out by talking about the longevity of the housing crisis. 40 years old now. 18 million families are paying more than 50% of their income on housing. And he contrasts that with the profits made by the five largest banks on Wall Street. And he asks, how are families in America supposed to pay for food, transportation, healthcare, prescription drugs, education, and childcare when over half of their income is going to pay the rent or the mortgage? The sad and painful reality is that many of them cannot, and millions of Americans are going deeply into debt just to make ends meet. In America today, there's virtually no city where a full-time, minimum wage worker can afford a decent two-bedroom apartment. Meanwhile, the top 25 hedge fund managers in America made an average of 850 million apiece last year. In America today, over 500,000 people will be sleeping out on the streets or in homeless shelters because they don't have the money to put a roof over their heads. Meanwhile, large profitable corporations like Amazon, which is owned by the wealthiest person in the world, pay nothing in federal income taxes. And then he goes through a number of the other outrages, which I will not read. But The bottom line is we need a homes guarantee. Every American must have a safe, decent, accessible, and affordable home as a fundamental right. And then he embellishes that statement. I won't read the embellishment, but I'm going to jump right to the bottom lines. I'm sorry, honey, what's up? Oh. Bonnie tells me I have an echo. Okay. So, hope I've reduced it now. Huh? So Bonnie says I have a substantial echo. That may be because I failed to knock off the sound. There we go. How's that? That should be better. Let me go back to Bernie's plan now. When Bernie is president, he will invest $1.48 trillion. That's $148 billion per year on the average over 10 years in the National Affordable Housing Trust Fund to build, to rehabilitate and preserve the 7.4 million quality, affordable, and accessible housing units necessary to eliminate the affordable housing gap, which will remain affordable in perpetuity. Units constructed with this funding will be eligible to be located in mixed income developments. Okay, now why does he want that? He wants that because he doesn't want housing segregation. It is valuable to poor people and valuable to middle class people too, and to richer people to be in the same neighborhood as the poorer people. Relationships can be struck up and people can learn from each other experiences. That creates community. One thing Bernie wants to do is to create the community. He doesn't like the way our housing has become segregated by class. And of course, he doesn't like the way it's segregated by race either. He wants to use federal preemption laws to ensure these units are not segregated or excluded by local zoning ordinances. So that means he's going to pass such laws. He will also invest an additional $400 billion. That's $40 billion a year on the average over 10 years to build 2 million mixed income social housing units to be administered through the National Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which will help desegregate and integrate communities. This plan will guarantee equity in social housing units, ensuring no inequality of services or conditions within these social housing units. Notice the emphasis on equity, on fairness, on justice. Expand the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Section 515 program by $500 million to build new affordable developments in the rural areas and protect existing units from being converted to market rate housing. He's not being explicit on how he's going, but to prevent that, I presume it's having rules in the legislation such that the affordable developments in the rural areas will not be able to be converted to market rate housing without first selling those units to the government. Next, he wants to increase funding for the Indian Housing Block Grant to $3 billion to build, preserve, and rehabilitate affordable housing in Indian country. So, just that first part of the housing program is pretty revolutionary right there. What Bernie's talking about, once again, the really big items: 2 million mixed income social housing units, 7.4 million quality, affordable, and accessible housing units. And that number is based on current estimates of the gap in quality, affordable, and accessible housing units now existing in the United States. Okay, the next section of the plan: revitalize our public housing stock. He talks about how the housing stock has been falling into disrepair for years and years and years because our nation has failed to provide adequate funding for it. He points out that residents lose heat in the winter, need kitchen repairs to cook their meals. Excuse me for a minute. I think Bonnie's trying to tell me something. Oh, okay. Devorah sent me a message, and Bonnie was signaling me what that is, which is basically.
No, don't
Huh?
tell. Don't tell.
Okay, Bonnie says don't tell, so I won't tell. Okay. As a direct result of this chronic disinvestment, the residents lose heat in the winter, need kitchen repairs to cook their meals, and do not have adequate accommodations for residents with disabilities. Public housing residents should not be forced to live in unhealthy and unsafe conditions because of a massive underinvestment in these facilities. In America today, an estimated 1.6 million families are on a waiting list for public housing because of a lack of federal funding. And it can take several years before many of these families are able to receive the assistance they need. In addition, more than 10,000 public housing units are lost each year due to demolition and disposition, often because they are in poor condition. This can eliminate the only affordable housing option for communities throughout the United States. That is unacceptable. It is past time to preserve, to rehabilitate, and expand our nation's public housing stock. Here are the more specific promises. When Bernie is president, he will invest $70 billion to repair and modernize public housing, including making all public housing accessible and provide access to high speed high speed broadband for all public housing units. He will repeal the Faircloth Amendment to allow the construction of new public housing units. He will ensure that public housing has high quality, shared community spaces. Throughout the Green New Deal, or through the Green New Deal, is going to electrify and decarbonize all public housing by conducting deep energy retrofits, including appliances, power, and heating. Okay, the next part. He's going to make rent in housing more affordable for families. And he points out that today, 7.7 million families in America are forced to pay more than half of their limited incomes on rent because they're eligible for Section 8 assistance but do not receive it because of a lack of federal resources. Now, I happen to live myself in a low-income housing unit for people over 55. In other words, predominantly a seniors housing development. And there are many people here who are eligible for Section 8 assistance, but can't get it because there's a very long line of people who want to be funded and who can't be because the federal resources are not there. That is, the program is authorized by the federal government, but the money is not appropriated. So the eligibility doesn't mean that the people get the assistance. It's outrageous. It's outrageous. It's a travesty. It's a scam. Well, Congress passed the Section 8 rental assistance program a long, long time ago, right? So the problem is solved, right? No, it's not right because they never appropriated the money. To go on with Bernie, as a result, many of these families are forced to choose between paying rent or buying the food, medicine, or prescription drugs they need. An old story, right? We hear it all the time. One of the reasons why they can't buy the food or the medicine or prescription drugs they need is rent. 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 They got to pay rent. They got to provide a roof over their heads first. That is unacceptable. We need to fully fund the Section 8 rental assistance program to make sure that every person in America who is eligible for this program is able to get it without being put on a waiting list. This will significantly reduce poverty, help families at risk of becoming homeless, and reduce evictions. And importantly, this assistance will help families afford rent right away while new affordable homes are being constructed. Notice that, right away. They won't have to wait for the new affordable homes to be constructed. They can stay where they are with the rental assistance subsidies they will get. Specifically, when Bernie is president, he will fully fund tenant-based Section 8 rental assistance at $410 billion over the next 10 years. $41 billion per year. And make it a mandatory funding program for all eligible households. Strengthen the Fair Housing Act and implement a Section 8 non-discrimination law so that landlords can no longer discriminate against low-income families based on their source of income. Now they do. After this legislation, They won't be able to do that anymore. Next, he will expand and strengthen enforcement of the small area fair market rent rule to make sure that landlords are fairly compensated when they participate in Section 8, but do not make a windfall profit from the program. So they'll get fair compensation so that they'll choose to participate, but no windfall profits anymore. Next, Bernie's plan is going to protect the tenants because tenants in America are no longer protected. There's no justice for tenants. In America today, more than two-thirds of states preempt or limit the ability of their communities to establish rent control or stabilization rules to protect the American people against excessive increases in their rent. That has got to change. It says we need to establish a national rent control standard and allow cities and states to go even further to protect tenants from the skyrocketing price of housing. It says further, we must recognize that we are in the midst of an eviction crisis. At least 2 million renters throughout the country are at risk of losing their homes each year. Evictions, often over as little as $100, cause tremendous stress on families and can lead to worse health outcomes, to job losses, and an unacceptable disruption in a child's education. And Bernie says we need to protect tenants from unjust evictions and provide support to ensure we keep families in their homes. And he points out zip codes in New York City, where a right to counsel was created in 2017, saw their eviction rates drop 5 times faster than comparable areas. Expanding these programs to other states and cities will reduce evictions and give tenants fair representation in court. And the specifics, when Bernie is president, he will enact a national cap on annual rent increases at no more than 3% or 1.5 times the consumer price index, whichever is higher, to help to prevent the exploitation of tenants at the hands of landlords. It's going to allow for landlords to apply for waivers if significant capital improvements are made, which will incentivize landlords to improve the conditions of their properties. So that's for the slumlords. Remember, that's like for the Trumps of the world. To allow states and cities to pass even stronger rent control standards. I should have said it's for the Jared Kushners of the world. Allow states and cities to pass even stronger rent control standards. But Trump's properties are too expensive, I guess. I don't think he's a slumlord any longer. I think his father was, though. Implement a just cause requirement for evictions, which would allow a landlord to evict a tenant only for specific violations and prevent landlords from evicting tenants for arbitrary or retaliatory reasons. And to see that this is enforced, he's going to provide $2 billion in federal matching grants for states and localities to provide a right to counsel for persons in eviction or foreclosure proceedings or at risk of losing their Section 8 rental assistance. I don't know how I feel about the $2 billion in federal matching grants for states, and for localities. It doesn't seem to me quite right because it provides an incentives for them to provide a right to counsel. I think the federal government should mandate that they have a right to counsel and that it ought to pay for it. Uh, in the full scope of this plan, with nearly $3 trillion being appropriated for it over 10 years, seems to me $4 billion in order to provide a right to counsel that could be provided and could be administered by federal regions. Okay, next section is to combat gentrification, exclusionary zoning, segregation, and speculation. He says, while we expand and build new housing, we must ensure that current tenants and homeowners are not forced out of their homes and neighborhoods. We must also ensure that wealthy and exclusionary neighborhoods do not prevent new development, forcing gentrification and displacement in low-income and minority areas. In addition, the developers and speculators must not reap profits from these neighborhoods without reinvesting in the existing community. And he points out 9 states do not allow for inclusionary zoning rules that require developers to set aside affordable housing on their projects. He says that has got to change. We also need to promote integration and local segregation that excludes low-income and minority tenants and homeowners. Restrictive zoning ordinances are a racist are a racist legacy of Jim Crow efforts to enforce segregation. We need to make federal housing and transportation funds contingent on remedying these zoning ordinances and coordinate with state and local officials and leaders to ensure equitable zoning. Federal funds must no longer be used to segregate and disrupt our communities. The interstate highway expansion often cut through low-income and minority communities, segregated urban areas, and contributed to sprawl. We must reorient federal policy to create to create livable, connected communities for all. When Bernie is president, he will create an office within the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, to coordinate and work with states and municipalities to strengthen rent control and tenant protections, implement fair and inclusive zoning ordinances, streamline review processes, and direct funding where these changes are made. This office will convene key leaders, academics, experts, the local officials, renters, tenants, and homeowners to create and implement these necessary solutions. Next, he'll preempt laws that prevent inclusionary zoning for luxury development. That is, he'll preempt the state and local laws by passing federal laws. Next, he'll end exclusionary and restrictive zoning ordinances and replace them with zoning that encourages racial, economic, and disability integration that makes housing more affordable. He'll require that recipients of federal funding from the Department of Transportation and the Department of Housing and Urban Development make these important zoning reforms. And he'll provide funding to states that preempt local exclusionary zoning ordinances to make housing more equitable and accessible and affordable for all. He'll also make federal funding contingent on creating livable communities. That means he'll encourage zoning and the development that actually promotes integration and access to public transportation to reduce commuting time, congestion, and long car commutes. He'll also prioritize projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And he'll create walkable and also livable communities that reduce urban sprawl. He'll encourage zoning and development designed to expand and maximize the number of units fully accessible to people with disabilities. He'll place a 25% house flipping tax on speculators who sell a non-owner occupied property if sold for more than it was purchased within 5 years of purchase. That's going to put a crimp in house flipping, folks. That's going to stop it in its tracks. He's going to impose a 2% empty homes tax on the property value of vacant owned homes to bring more units into the market and curb the use of housing as a speculative investment. This is all designed to reduce the occurrence of housing bubbles in the United States, which then in turn become a source of extreme speculation that can end in a housing crash that in turn can trigger the kind of recession we had in 2008. Remember, the 2008 recession started with a housing boom crash. 2008 started with a housing boom crash in 2007. That's the way it started. And last, he'll encourage circuit breakers on property taxes to protect homeowners in gentrifying neighborhoods from being priced out of their homes as their property values rise. In other words, as their property values rise, their property taxes will not be able to rise because there'll be circuit breakers, blocks on the rise, of property taxes. He'll also end homelessness in America. And he says, it is unacceptable that in America tonight more than 500,000 Americans will be sleeping out on the streets or in homeless shelters because they don't have the money to put a roof over their heads, while the 3 richest families in America experienced a $101 billion increase in their wealth just last year. He says, this is a national embarrassment. In the richest country on earth, we will invest nearly $32 billion over the next 5 years to end homelessness in America. And he gets to the specifics. When Bernie is president, he will prioritize 25,000 National Affording Housing Trust Fund units in the first year to house the homeless. He will double the McKinney-Vento homelessness assistance grants to more than $26 million over the next 5 years to build permanent supportive housing. And he'll provide $500 million in funding to states and localities to provide outreach to the homeless, to help to connect them to case management and social services to ensure nobody is left behind in finding new homes. Next, his program will ensure fair housing for all. And he says it's unacceptable that more than 50 years after the passage of the Fair Housing Act, people still face housing discrimination on the basis of race, sex, gender, religion, country of origin, or disability. So that has got to end. We must strengthen and expand the Fair Housing Act and increase enforcement to eliminate housing discrimination, which is still pervasive throughout the U.S. And the specifics: as president, Bernie will create an independent national fair housing agency similar to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. That is the bureau that was created by the Obama administration in response to Elizabeth Warren's call for it. But the National Fair Housing Agency will be dedicated to protecting renters from housing discrimination, investigating landlords who misuse their Section 8 vouchers, and enforce housing standards for renters. The Fair Housing Agency will also conduct audits to hold landlords and sellers engaged in housing discrimination accountable. He'll create an office within the Fair Housing Agency to protect the mobile home residents from housing discrimination, rent instability, and unjust evictions. He'll fully fund the Fair Housing Assistance and Fair Housing Initiative programs at $1 billion over the next 10 years. He'll pass the Equality Act to include LGBTQ plus Americans in the Fair Housing Act. He'll implement the affirmatively furthering fair housing rule blocked by President Trump's administration to ensure that federal funds will promote fair housing. He'll enforce the Olmstead decision, Section 504, and the Americans with Disabilities Acts to ensure access to accessible, integrated housing. He'll ensure that all new Section 811 supportive housing is fully integrated. He'll make sure that people who have served their time are not excluded from public housing. He'll ensure that no survivor of domestic violence can be evicted on the basis of their assault. In other words, people who are assaulted by their partners will not be able to get evicted because of this. Lastly, he'll guarantee that renters have the right to form a tenants union, free from retaliation by landlords or managing agents. So far, this plan is wonderful, isn't it? Next, he'll expand sustainable home ownership. When Bernie was mayor of Burlington, Vermont, he took the lead in establishing the first city-funded community land trust to provide affordable homeownership opportunities to working families, now called the Champlain Housing Trust. It now manages over 600 shared equity homes and has helped over 1,000 families become first-time homebuyers. In a community land trust, families purchase homes at affordable prices and agree to sell them back to the trust at a restricted price. This keeps homes affordable in perpetuity and builds wealth for families who currently are priced out of home ownership. As president, Bernie will provide grants to states, cities, and towns to establish their own community land trusts that will enable over 1 million households to purchase a shared equity home over the next 25 years. Further, when those families begin building wealth and move on to conventional home ownership, The homes will remain affordable for future owners. This program will combat gentrification. For example, the Douglas Community Land Trust in Washington, D.C., which operates in gentrified areas, has successfully helped many families stay in the neighborhoods they grew up in or have lived in for decades. Moreover, this program will promote um, uh, um, resident owned manufactured housing communities to give residents more control over their housing costs and to prevent evictions. How's he going to do all that? The specifics. As president, Bernie will invest $50 billion over 10 years to provide grants to start and expand community land trusts and other shared equity home ownership models. This funding will enable over 1 million households to purchase affordable homes over the next 25 years. He's going to invest an additional $15 billion to enact a 21st Century Homestead Act based on the work of Mirza Baradaran to purchase and revitalize abandoned communities to create community and individual wealth assets for historically disadvantaged communities. And he's going to instruct HUD to assist communities establishing shared equity homeownership by ensuring they can access existing federal housing programs and help new organizations build the necessary capacity to succeed. Next, he's going to support first-time home buyers. And then he talks about stagnant wages and outrageously high price of housing, and points out the American dream of home ownership is simply out of reach for tens of millions of families throughout the country. Points out the rate of home ownership in America is lower today than it was in 1980 and still has not recovered from the 2008 housing crisis. He says that has got to change. We need to substantially expand federal programs to make sure that Americans throughout the country have the ability to buy their first home. The American dream restored. We also need to make housing counseling available to all prospective home buyers. Study after study shows that people who receive counseling before buying a home are far more likely to succeed at home ownership. As president, here are the specifics. He'll invest an additional $2 million at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, an additional $6 million at HUD to create a first-time homebuyer assistance program that will increase home ownership. The $2 billion for the USDA is because the USDA has housing programs for agricultural areas in the United States, for rural areas. And finally, he'll expand pre-purchase housing counseling to all prospective home home buyers. Next, he will end predatory lending and modern-day redlining. He says when he was on the House Financial Services Committee, he fought to end predatory lending in the subprime housing market. But he said Congress refused to act, and predatory subprime lending became rampant. Millions of Americans lost their homes, jobs, and life savings, while Wall Street received the largest taxpayer bailout in the history of the world with no strings attached. Yes, it exceeded in various ways more than $30 trillion. The total amount is not known even now because the last study that was done on this put the tab at $29 trillion in credit facilities to banks. That was back in 2012. We don't know what's happened since then. And uh, almost 40% of the wealth of black Americans in the 2009 housing crisis was lost. And they were directly targeted by predatory lenders. While the government bailed out the crooks on Wall Street, ordinary Americans who were victims, of the predatory lending and mortgage frauds, remember, there was widespread mortgage frauds from 2009, and I think they may still be going on. But certainly through 2013, 2014, 2015, the robo signings was still going on. And for all we know, they may still be going on right now. They may even have been accelerated during the Trump administration. Next, Americans who lost their homes as a result of mortgage fraud, and predatory lending must be provided the down payment assistance they need to buy a new home or receive financial aid to pay their current mortgage or rent. In other words, there must be reparations for people who were victimized following the crash. Further, many of the homes that Americans lost to foreclosure during the recession were sold right back to the same Wall Street firms that caused the crisis. Since the financial crisis, firms on Wall Street have purchased thousands of homes, turned them into rentals, and securitized them to make outrageous profits. Bernie says again, that has got to change. As president, he will end the mass sale of mortgages to Wall Street vulture funds and thoroughly investigate and also regulate the practices of large rental housing investors and owners. He'll make data such as evictions, rent increases, and safety violations for large landlords. He'll make that available to the public and the Department of Housing and Urban Development. He'll increase enforcement to protect families against fraudulent, deceptive, and abusive lending practices and ensure all mortgage costs are clear, that risks are visible, and that nothing is buried in fine print. Well, there's no way to do that, Bernie, except to outlaw fine print. I think all the contracts have to be printed in 12-point print. No less than 12-point print, could be allowed. Remember, older people can't see 10-point print too well. And when it gets down to 8-point print, that's it. Anyway, implement the legislation to prevent abusive, quote, contract for deed transactions. I think those are transactions where one doesn't really get the deed to the property until one's whole contract is up. And use existing authorities to protect communities of color, which for too long have been exploited by this practice. This will be done by protecting consumers currently participating in contract for deed agreements by ensuring aggressive protections and decent standards for the consumers, which, of course, this is going to be in new laws. So this will be written into laws. Next, he'll create a commission to establish a financial relief program to the victims of the predatory lending, the mortgage fraud, the redlining, and those who are still underwater on their mortgages as a result of the 2008 Wall Street crash, because there are many people who are still underwater 10 years later. This program shall include down payment assistance, mortgage relief, or rental assistance. This program must include protections to ensure that the financial relief it provides goes to the people who need it and not the Wall Street speculators who caused the crisis. And of course, we need him, okay, as president to ensure that the next administration doesn't botch up the administration of these programs so that the speculators do benefit from it. Because believe me, they'll be there, they'll be trying, they'll continue to lobby, and they'll try to undermine this program of all programs. Next, he's going to decarbonize our housing. Okay, and this is something that comes from the Green New Deal program. His Green New Deal program will pass a Green New Deal to achieve 100% sustainable energy for electricity and a fully decarbonized building sector by no later than 2030 as president. He's going to weatherize homes, perform energy efficiency upgrades to make buildings more energy efficient and lower energy bills. He's going to provide grants for low and moderate income families and small businesses to invest in weatherizing and retrofitting their homes and their businesses. And please note that these are grants for low and moderate income families and small businesses, not loans, grants. In other words, money up front. Because our mobile home stock is leaky and often very old, we plan to replace all mobile homes with quality zero energy modular homes. Next, he's going to electrify homes. He'll provide grants, and notice grants again, for low and moderate income families to invest in cheaper electricity for these needs. A federal mandate through the Department of Energy will ensure that all new construction and wealthy homeowners meet our electrification goals. And then there will be an energy assistance program. We will expand the low-income home energy assistance program, LEAP, LIHEAP, to help low-income families pay their heating and cooling bills. Further, the program will be expanded to provide 10% of program costs for maintenance of new efficient heating and cooling systems and technical assistance for the installation and use of new furnaces, heat pumps, new boilers, and other upgrades for the duration of the 10-year transition. Next, he'll decarbonize public housing. Throughout the Green New Deal, we will electrify and decarbonize all public housing by conducting deep energy retrofits, including appliances, power, and heating. We'll also ensure that public housing has quality shared community spaces to ensure every public housing complex has the capacity to serve as a community resiliency center. I'd love to see the specific legislation for that. I'll bet it's going to be a doozy. Anyway, he's going to save families money, on energy bills. He says after 2035, electricity will be virtually free aside from the operations and also the maintenance costs. So that's the program. I think it's a wonderful housing program. I think it's far and away the best housing program we've seen offered so far. The size of it, in terms of the expenditures on it, is as much, okay, as Elizabeth Warren is spending on her green but New Deal plan, and far more than she plans to spend on her housing plan. I think the comparison is ridiculous. I mean, this plan involves nearly $3 trillion, okay, of appropriations. 1.48 trillion simply to build and to rehabilitate and preserve the 7.4 million quality, affordable, and accessible housing units necessary to eliminate the affordable housing gap in this country. 1.5 trillion alone for that, and then all the rest of it. I mean, it's a magnificent plan. And we should all be celebrating over this plan. If not for ourselves, then celebrating for the people who are going to benefit from it. It is just an incredible plan. So, I'm going to see now what you have to say about it. What I have to say about it is that it's just great. It's absolutely great. He adds this to all the other wonderful programs that he has, all the carefully thought through and carefully worked out programs that he has. So let me go back to Facebook now and see what you think. There we are. And Mark Zimmerman has joined. Hi, Mark. And Rob Rivera, Randy Hedgerbeth, Steve Wolfbrandt, Dale Weaver. Facebook just kicked you out of this video? Why'd they kick you out? Sandy says Congress needs to appropriate that money or we primary them. Actually, she said appreciate that money, but that's all right. Yes, it is wonderful that Bernie is addressing this so thoroughly. So thoroughly. Thank you for your comments. Dale says, here in New Jersey, property taxes are an outrage. I know they are. I know they are. I have some relatives who live in Jersey. They've always been outrageous. I mean, they've been outrageous in Jersey since the 1970s. I remember back that far, people were complaining how outrageous they were. Of course, in New York, they're also outrageous. At least in the downstate of New York, they're outrageous. Upstate's not so bad. Randy says, this is exactly what my system would be ideal for. Yeah, Randy. Yeah, you should be able to get a lot of business from this. And Randy says, how about no energy bills? How about that? How about that? Wouldn't that be fantastic? Actually, what I think he said, okay, is no electricity. Did he say no energy? I can go back, okay, and double check on that. Did I say no energy bills or did I say no electricity bills? After 2035, electricity will be virtually free, aside from operations, okay, and maintenance costs. Now, of course, the heating could be done through electricity also. And I guess it would be because he's not going to go to fossil fuels for heating. So he's probably going to go to heat pumps that are driven by electricity and by solar. Margot said, I always wonder who are the wonderful people that helped to put this plan together. I think Bernie has quite a staff, both on his campaign, okay, and in Congress. And I think they've been working on a housing plan for years because he's been concerned about housing for years. But since he was the mayor, it's also apparent that he introduced housing bills in the Obama administration that were not passed. That he also introduced some new bills in 2016. So Bernie's been thinking about this for years and years and years, and had people on his staff who've been thinking about it for years and years. And he has extremely bright people both on his campaign staff and also on his Senate staff. Extremely bright people, top tier people. He's always had top tier people. And of course, his consultants. His consultants are also very, very great people, very smart. And Randy says, no energy bills through solar. Yes, no energy bills through solar. And Dale says, to elect Bernie will do nothing as long as the Congress is under Republican control. Yes, we know that. We can't pass Bernie's programs without having a brand new Congress that ain't just a catchphrase, as you say. We need a brand new Congress, and it has to be full of people who are progressive. And Dale says, yes, and my county, Essex, is the worst of the worst. I remember Essex County very well because that is where my aunt lived for many, many years. She's gone now, but but she was very dear to me. And when I lived in and around the New York area, I visited her out there very frequently. I know Essex County has some problems. And Randy says no energy bills through solar. Sandy Zeg says North Jersey is higher than South Jersey, but ours is still expensive. Yeah, well, South Jersey, of course, is closer to Philadelphia, and North Jersey is closer to New York. So there it is. Costs in New York are higher than they are in Philly, but they're high in Philly now too. And Randy says hot water, radiant, solar driven. Great, Randy. Okay, I'd like to remind you at this point, I'd like to remind you to share, like, and subscribe when this goes up, okay, on YouTube, which will be very shortly. And my Patreon account is uh, okay, my Patreon account is at the www the patreon.com Joe_Firestone. And thank you for anything you can do at Patreon. I appreciate it, of course. I'll go back to Facebook now and see what further comments you have. Okay, I'll wait a little while to see if you've got any further comments. I don't see any more. I'll have a little wine while I'm waiting.
They had 10.
Hmm?
They built 10 homes using those machines that are called printed homes. No kidding.
Yeah,
Under $4,000.
under $4,000.
Somewhere, yeah.
Okay, so Bonnie tells me that 10 homes have been built for $4,000 per home by
The machine printed.
the Mammoth printers that print
Concrete homes.
concrete homes.
They could see that on the web.
I have a suspicion Bernie's homes are going to be more expensive than $4,000 a home. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. I'm sure he'll see to it that the best technology available is used for the new affordable housing. Susan says good night. Good night, Susan. Thank you for coming. Sandy says, ooh, wine. And also, thank you, Joe. Yes, I'm no longer on the zone diet. I was on it for some long time. But I always retain one of the habits of the zone diet. And that was to have a snack at night and also a glass of wine. Now, these days, I restrict my portion of wine. It's only 1 ounce, okay, at 9 o'clock, for reasons, okay, I won't go into. But amazingly, that's just fine. That really doesn't trouble me at all. Sandy Degg asks, are they tiny homes?
Some are. It depends. The tiny homes were $4,000. You can see it online.
Okay, well, specifically,
Icon.
the 10 homes that were built, were they tiny homes or full size?
Tiny.
Oh, so the 10 homes were tiny homes.
Yeah.
Yes. Right, so they're good for bachelors.
Anybody.
So Bonnie says they're good for anybody. Yeah, they're probably good for seniors.
Well, they can see them online if they want.
Any other comments or questions? So thank you all for coming. I think I'm going to say goodnight now. So I'll end the stream. I'll see you tomorrow night. There's lots to talk about. It should be a great time. So